And that's why I will continue to tell the story of my people. I will continue to say that we are not numbers, that we have lives, we had lives, and we will continue to have lives in Gaza.
Welcome to the latest episode of Kindred Stories. We've been on a bit of a break for Kinso for a couple of months, but we have 2 episodes, this episode, another episode before the end of the year to wrap things up. Sharil, today we want to talk about Gaza. I don't know if you sense maybe slight fatigue. We continue to share things on our social media, but for many people, I was in Indonesia recently, and this lady asked me a question saying that, how do we fight against this fatigue? Because apparently in Indonesia, the Starbucks are full again.
It's full again.
Indonesia, in Malaysia, it's still very empty. It's still very empty. We're still in solidarity as far as that's concerned. But do you sense this slight sort of?
I think if we're honest, there is a bit of a fatigue.
Yeah.
And if I'm critical of myself, there's maybe a bit on my side as well. You know, I still share the stories, but maybe less vociferously than maybe a few months ago, and I catch myself when that happens.
Yeah,
life has a way of taking over, and day-to-day stuff takes over. But every time I feel that slide, I quickly remind myself of what's actually happening right this moment, and that's something we've got to keep top of mind.
Yeah, so I thought as the penultimate episode for Kindred Stories for this year, it'd be important for us, I think, to shine the light once again on Gaza. And we are joined this episode by an activist, a writer, someone who was born in Gaza, someone who continues to tell stories about Gazans, about Palestinians, about his people, his land. And I thought that this would be an interesting conversation, because when you humanize a story, when you tell a story about somebody, that's
kind of what we try and do in our lives now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it resonates more than just the headlines and just the numbers. So we're happy to welcome Yousef Aljamal, who currently has an official position as the Gaza coordinator for the Palestine Activism Program, the American Friends Service Committee. He's a writer, he's an activist. He's somebody who is familiar to Malaysia, who's gotten his master degree from University Malaya. Yousef, welcome to Kindred Stories. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Peace be upon you. Thank you for having me.
Yousef, welcome back to Malaysia. I understand that you studied here for 2 years. You did your master's degree at the University Malaya, and you're back here for a conference on Gaza. Maybe we can start at the beginning, Yousef. We can start where you were born. You were born at Nuseirat refugee camp in Gaza. You grew up there. You went to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA school, before you traveled the world. You lived in Malaysia. You are now currently based in Turkey, where you've just completed your PhD. Before we go into what's happening today, before we go into the genocide, the ongoing occupation, and what we must do to continue the global resistance, tell us about growing up in Gaza, being born there, and what it was like.
Thank you very much for having me. I grew up in Nuseirat refugee camp, and Nuseirat is one of 8 refugee camps in Gaza. 70% of people in Gaza are refugees, including my own family. The refugee camp was very crowded. We had about 100,000 refugees living in 9 square kilometers. So it's very crowded. There is no sense of privacy at all. Roads were dusty. The infrastructure was very poor. 97% of Gaza's water was unfit for human consumption, and this was before October 7. The unemployment rate is very high. There is a sense of lack of hope among people. There is a very high literacy rate. A lot of people are educated, but there are no jobs. And then living under siege and electricity outages, we would have electricity for 4 hours a day, sometimes 8 hours a day. And this has been going on since 2005, 2006. So there's no electricity, no clean water. The place is very crowded. But you always hear the screams of kids on the street because they have no parks to play.
Yeah. If I can just ask a basic question so that the viewers can understand a bit better. When you say you are a refugee in Gaza, where were you running from? I mean, people have sometimes this perception that Palestinians who are in Gaza, in West Bank, they have their own homes, they are staying there. So what do you mean you are a refugee in Gaza? Where were you running from?
My family lived in Aqr village in what is today Israel until 1948. And they were forced at gunpoint to leave the village and they became refugees in Gaza.
Right.
Following Israel's creation. And this is the situation for 70% of people in Gaza.
So this was the Nakba.
This is the Nakba, what we call the Nakba, the catastrophe, the events that befell the Palestinian people and that led to the creation of Israel and the mass displacement of Palestinian refugees. So my grandparents kept walking on foot in 1948 at gunpoint until they made it to Nuseirat. They lived in Rafah refugee camp for a couple of years and then they moved to Nuseirat. So they became internally displaced refugees in their own country. And this has been the situation for the past 76 years. It was actually the American Friends Service Committee, where I work now as the Gaza coordinator, that started Palestinian refugee camps in 1948. And the AFSC provided Palestinian refugees with aid until December 1949. That's when the United Nations decided to create UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, that has been taking care of Palestinian refugees and Palestinian refugee camps up until now. And hence we have Israel's war on UNRWA that is trying to end the question of Palestinian refugees.
When you were growing up as a child in the refugee camp, when was the first realization as Yousef, as a young person, that that something was not quite right, that you were a refugee, that you were in a land which was Palestinian, but clearly you had lost your original homes, you were dispossessed, and you were you didn't have a home?
I grew up in a house made of tent in Gaza, and this was the first realization that something was not right. And then attending UNRWA schools, but also like playing in the streets of the refugee camp, you could realize like the big number of kids, and many of them are not, like wearing their shoes, for example, or the sewage or on the road, the small streets. You feel like this is not a proper developed urban space. And then attending UNRWA schools from the first until the 9th grade, you are reminded every day that you are a refugee. The colors of the UN, white and blue, the buildings, the school. Even you're asked at the school about your original village. And then receiving aid from UNRWA. My family received aid every 3 months. And I would go with my father, who passed away during the genocide because of the lack of medicine, to receive aid. So there are like many reminders every day, everywhere, that you are a refugee, you're stateless, and you live in a situation that is not normal.
And what is the interaction with people who are from Gaza? Gazan people, as in people who were not forced out of their homes, but actually were from Gaza. Do you have interaction when you were growing up with Gazans who are from there?
So there are 8 refugee camps, but these refugee camps have expanded over the years because the population has increased. Like if you look at the statistics in 1948, the natives of Gaza were about 80,000.
Small.
And then overnight,
Yeah.
the population tripled to over 300,000. So there was a huge influx of refugees. You can imagine the difficulties of dealing with their needs and
Sure.
having to provide for them education-wise, health-wise, etc. And over the years, the population of Gaza has increased to reach 2.3 million Palestinians today. So Gaza is very crowded and the refugee camps have expanded. Sometimes you cannot tell where the refugee camp starts and ends.
Right.
So there's a huge interaction between the natives of Gaza and Palestinian refugees. Many people from Gaza attend UNRWA schools and vice versa. For example, for my high school, I attended a high school run by the Palestinian government. So it's not run by UNRWA. So you get to see people from different backgrounds, and it's very much interconnected, marriage-wise, trade-wise, culture-wise. So almost there is no distinction between the lines of the refugee camp and the city now, or towns that existed before the influx of Palestinian refugees.
When did you realize that this situation is created by Israel?
With the outbreak of the second Palestinian Intifada in Gaza in 2000.
How old were you?
I was 11 years old. I was the same age as Muhammad al-Durra, who was shot in front of cameras in his father's lab.
Yeah.
And he was from Al Bureij refugee camp, just across the street from Nuseirat. And I would watch Israeli helicopters shooting at Palestinians. And young Palestinians throwing stones at Israeli settlements and soldiers. The sounds of gunshots, helicopters hovering around, all these served as reminders that this is Israel's creation and Israel is behind this misery. It's a man-made misery and it could be resolved tomorrow if justice is served. And again, like losing even school friends. I have lost many of my childhood friends, school friends, who were shot by the Israeli army or whose houses were bombed and then they lost their lives. So there was always a constant reminder that Israel is there. As young students, we would leave the school and go out to protest Israel's actions. And every time someone we know would be injured or killed. So in the school itself, there were many children who were injured and killed, and this has served as a reminder of Israel's ongoing military occupation.
Yousef, one of the tactics that Israel deploys is to dehumanize the Palestinian people so that they can convey to the world and to themselves somehow that Palestinians are lesser and that what they do in terms of taking your land, taking your rights is fair because you're not the same. Tell us on a daily basis growing up in Gaza, what do they do? What do the Israeli soldiers do? What do the Israeli politicians say? What does the Israeli media write about that dehumanizes the Palestinian?
Now there is an increasing use of the term de-civilization.
De-civilization?
Yeah, so to civilize Palestinians and refer to them as military objects. And this
so you are not a people?
Yeah, we're not a people. We're just military targets. This includes demonization as well as dehumanization. And therefore, we have projects. In Gaza, there's a project called We Are Not Numbers, where Palestinians share their stories out of Gaza, stories of loss, of hope, of aspiration, of thinking about the future, of mothers, of teachers, students, engineers, just sharing their arts, music. So there's a systematic campaign, I would say, by Israeli politicians to dehumanize Gaza. If you remember, Israel's former defense minister, who was fired by Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, in his first statement following October 7, he said, there is no water, no electricity, no food for Gaza. And we are dealing, quote unquote, with human animals.
Yes.
And this is a clear-cut example of dehumanization, of looking at Palestinians as human animals. In fact, in the past, there was a radio program in Israel asking people what to do with Gaza. And one of the people who spoke in said we should turn Gaza into the biggest parking lot in the world. And this is how Israel sees Gaza, a parking lot. And if you look at the destruction that has nothing to do with military necessity that took place in Gaza after October, complete destruction of schools, hospitals, roads, cultural centers. This has nothing to do with military necessity. Again, it's part of dehumanization and looking at Palestinians as mere statistics that should leave Gaza. Israel's interior or internal security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, said a few days ago that the goal is to push half of Gaza's population out within a year. So dehumanization is seen every day, everywhere. The way we are treated at checkpoints when we would leave Gaza, because Gaza has two major border crossings, one with Egypt that is completely shut down and destroyed now, Rafah. But also there was another checkpoint that connects northern Gaza with Israel, where Palestinian patients would apply for permits to have surgeries in the West Bank and sometimes in Israel as part of an agreement with the Palestinian Ministry of Health, because the health infrastructure in Gaza was very poor. And the dehumanization, the ill treatment at these checkpoints was very prominent, I would say. There was a regime of permits used by Israel to collectively punish Palestinians and push them to collaborate. So if you are a cancer patient, for example, they would give you a permit to have the first chemotherapy session, but not the second one. And they would try to pressure you to collaborate with them. This was a common practice by Israel. And the humiliation, you have to wait long hours, you get a rejection for no reason, or you're given a permit for one time, but not for the second time.
Have you personally experienced this yourself?
Your
family?
Mom is from the West Bank, and it took her 12 years to get an Israeli permit to visit her own family.
To cross from Gaza to the West Bank?
It's an hour drive in Jericho and Bethlehem, and it took 12 years. And only after I wrote about it, and there was a human rights organization in Israel called, not B'Tselem, but I believe Gisha, that petitioned on her behalf before the Israeli Supreme Court. So imagine like this minor case reaching the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided to grant her a 4-day permit to visit her family. Even when her parents passed away in 2003, 2008, she was not given a permit to visit her family. So this is a common practice. And I mean, like personally, I was denied a permit to join a conference in Jordan in 2013. So leaving through Israel is not even an option for young people, because you will get a rejection immediately. And also leaving through.
So this idea that Gazans can freely go to the West Bank and come back and all of that, this is nonsense.
No one can move freely in Gaza, even before October 7. You have to get a permit from Israel. If you're young, forget about it. 99% you will get rejected. But then the other option is Egypt the Rafah crossing, and this was not easy as well. And some people had to pay money to leave, including during the genocide. If you're young, it's more challenging. There are students who lost their scholarships. When I came to Malaysia in 2013, it took me 5 failed attempts to leave Gaza. Every time I would go to the border at Rafah and wait until I go back and say goodbye to my family, and the following day I have dinner with them again.
Goodbye.
Yeah,
again,
it was
5
too late
times.
to come here, and it was very hard and challenging. And even the way out of Gaza, I was with the Refaat Alareer on the same bus.
Yeah. We'll speak about them later.
Yes. It took me about 5 weeks of waiting, and every time I had to change my ticket. And usually you get a last minute ticket, and this costs you a lot of money. And then you leave Gaza through Egypt, and it takes you, at the time, it took me about 2 days on my way to Cairo airport. So traveling has never been easy for Palestine.
When was the last time you were in Gaza?
2016, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And this is exactly why I haven't been back in Gaza, because getting in and out of Gaza is very difficult.
Say you want to go back tomorrow. It's not possible.
I can't. It's completely destroyed now. The border is completely destroyed. I cannot go back. I haven't seen my family.
What is the situation of your family?
Just like the situation of everybody, a total of 40 people in my extended family were killed by the Israeli military. Every day we receive bad news. Starvation is spreading. The majority of houses belonging to my family were destroyed.
Can you communicate with your family?
I do, but sometimes in the past it was very hard. Even for a whole week, you wouldn't reach them because of the blackout by Israel. But now communication is possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. So I text them, I communicate with them on regular basis. In the past, I would struggle to reach out to them. It would take me days, sometimes weeks, to communicate with them, because Israel shut the communication system in Gaza completely. Everything in Gaza is controlled by Israel. Water, electricity, internet, the phone service, landline service. Everything is controlled by Israel. So they just turn it off and that's it. And then they come and say, oh, we do not control Gaza. They do control Gaza. Everything in Gaza is controlled by Israel. And there is a siege around Gaza from land, sea, and air. And this has always been the situation since 2006. It actually started in 1982. So the siege around Gaza started a long time ago, but it has been getting worse every year.
I think it's important for our viewers and listeners to understand that even before October last year, many people who have been to Gaza or from Gaza describe it as the biggest open air prison in the world. Because as you said, there's a blockade, there's a siege, you cannot move people, you cannot move goods, you cannot move anything in and out. I tried to go on the flotilla from Greece back in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And we weren't even allowed to leave Corfu, the port, because of the international complicity with the Israeli regime.
Absolutely. And there was a single case of a boat that made it to Gaza under international pressure, I believe in 2010, was it 2008, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, all other boats that attempted to sail to Gaza were turned back.
Yeah.
And attacked even. My sister passed away in 2007 because Israel denied her a permit to have a surgery in the West Bank. And she was 26 years old. The surgery was minor, but again, because of the collapse of the health infrastructure in Gaza, it was impossible to have it in Gaza. And she waited for a whole week at a hospital in Gaza City. And she passed away eventually. She was able to leave Gaza through the Rafah crossing that was also shut down. And when she was able to leave Gaza, it was too late. Once she had the surgery in Cairo, she passed away. And this is just an example. There are 700 people at least who lost their lives, Palestinian patients who lost their lives waiting for permits and borders to open. And this was the norm in Gaza.
This, your sister Zainab, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. Have you lost any other close siblings or family members to this round of genocide?
I lost my sister. As I said, my father passed away because of the lack of medicine. I lost a couple of direct cousins and a total of 40 people from my extended family. And this is the norm. I mean, there are families, extended families, who lost hundreds of people. So this is like, quote unquote, regular rate now for people in Gaza.
So before we go to the break, I want to ask you a very tough question. And I wanted to ask you this question because I think many of our listeners and viewers, when listening to your story, hearing your story just now, they probably have the same question as I do. You grew up in refugee camp, which was a result of an occupation by an occupying power. Your people have been systematically dehumanized. You've lost family members, your sister, your father, others, not just during the genocide, but even before that, during the blockade, during the siege. What prevented you from taking up arms and fighting the Israeli, but choosing another form of resistance? Your form of resistance is the pen. You're an activist. You write.
I think Israel's war on Palestine is also a war on memory and narrative. And storytelling is part and parcel of this war to encounter Israel's propaganda. When Israel was created, it was first created in the imagination of the Zionist movement as a tale. And then over the years, it was materialized on the ground. And I think to regain our rights and to have justice in Palestine, we have to create this justice, this word in our writings, in our words, in our stories, in our films. And to be there, we have to tell our story. And I believe writing is an act of healing. And it's an act of courage, as Dr. Refaat Alareer would always remind us. And so to be there and to be able to tell your story during these difficult times is a witness to history. And I think it takes much courage to do that. And again, it's a war on narrative too. So you have to tell your story. Your story should not be not only a counter narrative to Israel, because this makes it less unique. It has to be your own story, a very unique story away from Israel's narrative itself. So taking the pen and telling the story, in my point of view, is also an act of resistance. Just to tell your story and to be there, to be present, is an act of courage. And you just tell Israel that your narrative is not quite right. If you look at the intersectional global solidarity with Palestine, it's happening because of this narrative. There's a narrative coming out of Gaza by people in Gaza who, although going through a genocide, continue to take their phones and record and tell their stories. And the reason they do that is because they believe that the narrative surrounding Palestine will change because of this footage, because of these stories coming out of Gaza. Exposing Israel's occupation and propaganda is as important as resisting Israel on the ground. And that's why I will continue to tell the story of my people. I will continue to say that we are not numbers, that we have lives, we had lives, and we will continue to have lives in Gaza. Gaza was destroyed 7 times over history, and I think it's totally different when you read this in a history text than when you live it, especially that you have memories there, you have friends, or you had friends there. But again, if you look at the people of Gaza and the history of Gaza as a city, Gaza has always been rebellious throughout history. And the municipality of Gaza takes the phoenix, a bird that lived in Arabia for hundreds of years, as its symbol, because this bird always rises from ashes. Mm-hmm. And this is the story of Gaza. And I do believe that Gaza will also rise from ashes again.
Thank you, Yousef. That's you described your writing as resistance wonderfully, and I particularly like how you tell the stories in order to counter the effort to dehumanize your people. I think that's very important. What resonated with me just now is when you said Israel makes it a point to reduce Palestinians as military numbers, military targets. And I think by writing about these stories, telling these stories, and humanizing what's happening in Gaza and Palestine, I think that brings the message closer to so many people around the world. And thank you for doing that. We'll take a break and come back after this. Welcome back to this episode of Kindred Stories with Yousef Aljamal, Gaza coordinator, Palestine Activism Program for American Friends Service Committee. We can talk about your role at the AFSC in a bit, Yousef. When you were here as a master's student at University Malaya, Refaat Alareer was doing his PhD in University Putra, Malaysia. Of course, he was killed in the current genocide. You have recently written a book in his honor. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about the book and share with us why you decided to write this. And then I think Sharil wants to ask you a little bit about your writings as well.
So my relationship with Refaat Alareer started in 2007. I was his student at the Islamic University of Gaza. And in 2013, we traveled together to Malaysia. I wanted to do my master's at UM. He was doing his PhD. He started a year before at UPM. We flew on the same flight from Cairo, and I lived with him for 3 weeks in Serdang, in Sky Villa, here in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We traveled together in Malaysia to different cities promoting Gaza Writes Back, a book he co-edited, which I contributed to. Short stories by young Palestinian writers from Gaza that was also translated into Malay. And Refaat had a remarkable impact on me and on thousands of his students. He was the one who trained thousands of students in Gaza on creative writing, storytelling, narrative, the use of social media, translation, diplomacy. He was involved in many projects related to politics, filmmaking, social media. And we never felt that our relationship with him was a relationship between a teacher and his students. He was very humble. He had the opportunity to be anywhere in the world, but he chose Gaza. He loved Gaza and he wanted to tell the story of Gaza. And that's why he stayed in Shuja'iyya, his hometown. And he chose not to move to the south because he had a message in life. And his message was to counter Israel's narrative and propaganda. And that's why they made him a target. They killed him. And because of the remarkable impact Refaat had on me, and because of his famous poem, If I Must Die, which he wrote actually in 2011 to his eldest daughter, Shayma, who was killed along with her husband and child. Refaat became a grandfather after he was killed, so he did not live long.
April this year, I think she was killed.
Absolutely. And her child was only 2 months old. Refaat did not see his first grandchild. But to go back to the poem, he wrote this poem, If I Must Die, and published it on his blog called In Gaza, My Gaza, in November 2011. And he wrote it for his eldest child, Shayma, to serve as his will, but also to other people. But he pinned it to his X account in November 2023. So the poem went viral, and it was translated into 250 languages, including Malay, because it spoke to people, and many people were following Refaat on X, waiting for his updates out of Gaza. He was very talented. The way he wrote, his sense of humor, made his narrative relatable to many people. So people were waiting for these updates. And when he was killed, this poem went viral. If I must die, you must live to tell my story. And this is what we're doing now. And this is what I did in the book, to tell Refaat's story. And this is what thousands of people are doing now. I get requests for permissions from his family to turn this poem into songs, lyrics, films, performances. It's all over the world now, and Refaat is all over the world. And I think this is the most honorable way to die, being true to your narrative and message. So I compiled a book titled If I Must Die, that was published actually just yesterday by Or Books. It's available online. People can order it now to honor Refaat and his legacy. I have also been working on producing a memorial edition of Gaza Writes Back, which was originally published in 2014. So Refaat and I and Rawan Yaghi toured Malaysia and the United States in particular with Rawan, and me and Refaat in Malaysia, promoting Gaza Writes Back, which was also translated into Malay. And now there is a memorial edition by Just World Books, the publisher of Refaat's first edited book, to create the memorial edition. There are different publishing houses across the globe that wanted to republish Refaat's work, especially Gaza Writes Back. There are also now final negotiations with UPM Press to republish the memorial edition of Gaza Writes Back, as well as Refaat's thesis. He did his PhD at UPM. He wrote about John Donne. He studied in the English language department, John Donne as a revolutionary poet. And this is very typical of Refaat because he was a revolutionary figure. He would teach us about Edward Said, Franz Fanon, Amilcar Cabral, and John Donne in our classes. And he loved Shakespeare. And there was even a joke among his students that Refaat would keep a copy of Hamlet and Macbeth under his pillow when he sleeps, because he was very much invested in Shakespeare. And again, to honor him, I've been involved in these projects to keep his legacy and writings alive.
Fantastic.
Yousef, lovely to hear of your story and your journey through narrative and writing as resistance. I just want to insert myself into this conversation and ask something a bit more philosophical, which is, how much do you balance between the impact of your writing for today's resistance and for tomorrow's preservation of Palestinian sort of culture, history? How much of what you do today you feel is impactful today?
I remember in 2014 when Refaat and I traveled throughout the United States to promote Gaza Writes Back, the solidarity with Palestine was much less than it is today, especially among young people. So if we look at this 10-year period, there is a huge change in favor of Palestine. The narrative is changing and shifting in favor of Palestine. And this happened because of these talks, webinars, these books, these writings. I think the impact of Refaat chose to write fiction over non-fiction because he believed that literature lives on forever. He said, people will read Gaza Writes Back 100 years on. It's timeless. And even during these talks, I remember people would come up to Refaat and say, there was a young Jewish American guy. He came to Refaat and he said, I'm going to confront my dad tonight because he told me a different story. And I saw this firsthand. And I still get messages from people we met in 2014. I visited the United States many times after that, saying, we still remember you. There are people who organize vigils in remembrance of Refaat in Philadelphia and elsewhere in the United States because they met Refaat. So I think we should not underestimate the importance of words, the importance of stories, of narrative, because this war is about narrative too. And if you win narrative, you win the hearts of people, you change them. And I think Palestine has been winning the narrative in the United States. And that's why, among other reasons, the US government wants to shut down TikTok. Why? Because it reaches audiences and it's changing the narrative among young people in the United States. Yeah. So I think narrative is very important, and there is a change. I see a change, although it's not enough compared to what's happening in Gaza. We have a genocide, but definitely there is a positive change in favor of Palestine.
Yeah. You just to follow on, you mentioned about solidarity with other causes. You speak about Refaat's affinity with Fanon and other sort of influences of thought. One of your books is actually called A Shared Struggle, Stories of Palestinian and Irish Hunger Strikes. How important it is for you when you write that you also try and make yourself resonate with other struggles?
When the Allied forces, the British, invaded Gaza in the First World War, they brought indigenous people from New Zealand to fight in Palestine. And there are graves of indigenous Maori people in Gaza fighting in Palestine. At the same time, there is increasing solidarity among Maori people in favor of Palestine. I've been to Hawaii, and I've seen a huge solidarity with Palestinians there. I've seen the Palestinian flag, among other indigenous flags, on Mauna Kea, where indigenous Hawaiians, Kanaka Maoli, set up a protest camp to prevent building a 30-meter telescope on a sacred land. I've seen solidarity across ethnicities and groups in the US, Asian Americans, African Americans. So I think it's really important that Palestinians build these solidarity ties across societies, across divides, across ethnicities and backgrounds. So the question of Palestine is a global question of justice. It shouldn't be limited to a specific race. And it's not a religious war. It's never been a religious war. Palestinian Christians are equally targeted by Israel. And we have to be aware of that. And hence our solidarity, the way we build our intersectional solidarity should be global and international. I have seen solidarity from young people, old people, people protesting for Gaza, speaking about Gaza for more than a year now, from different parts of the world, is really important. Because, for example, it was South Africa that took Israel to The Hague. It wasn't even an Arab state. And there are more countries joining in now. So, and again, connecting the struggle with South Africa, with Ireland is important. It was Britain that brought settler colonialism to Ireland. It was Britain that brought settler colonialism to Palestine. So they are very much interconnected. If you look at administrative detention, a British law that was introduced in Palestine in 1936 that is still being used by Israel today. There is a similar law in Ireland that was used by the British too. So this, I mean, looking at the question of Palestinian hunger strikers, Irish hunger strikers, many people relate to the experience of Bobby Sands, but many people also do not know that there are also Palestinian Bobby Sands. There are Palestinians who served more than 40 years, 45 years in Israeli jails, political prisoners. Some of them died while on hunger strike. So I think it's important that we tell like a global story. What's happening in Palestine cannot be separated from capitalism impacting people in different parts of the world. So I think we have to look at the comprehensive picture of settler colonialism, occupation, exploitation, because what's happening in Palestine will not stop in Palestine. This violence, using Gaza as a testing field, will be exported to other countries. And we've seen this with police violence, for example, in different parts of the world, who were trained in Israel and then sent to their countries.
Yousef, coming back to building the narrative and telling the stories, when we look at how the world's attention has been fixed on Gaza and how you have managed to successfully win the narrative in many parts of the world that you mentioned, but there is also the worry that as the genocide goes on, there will be some fatigue. There will be some sense of not being as angry anymore as time goes by. I think this is also Israel's strategy to make it last for a long time, so the world's attention goes away. This is normal. As somebody who is involved in creating the narrative, telling the stories, how do you fight against this fatigue that you see in some parts of the world?
I always remind people that people in Gaza City and the northern part of the Gaza Strip have stayed there even though horrible massacres were committed against them, even though they're starved to death, even though they have no homes to live in anymore. But they chose to stay, just like Refaat did, to tell a story. So I think it would take much courage, resilience, and patience to be able to do that. Especially that entire families were erased from civic records because they chose to stay in their homes. So despite this huge military power and might shown by Israel to push people out of Gaza City and another part of Gaza, people are still there. So if these people manage to stay there under these conditions, without food, without water, without shelter, I think we should not give up on Gaza. We have the privilege of drinking water and eating food and having electricity right now. We are safe in our homes, among our children, while Palestinians are paying a heavy price. Just last night, Israel bombed Al-Mawasi, which is supposedly a designated safe zone, killing 20 people and burning people in their own tents. And this is, quote unquote, a safe zone. We do not have the choice to give up on Gaza, because Gaza did not give up. And more than a year down the road, Gaza is still resisting. So we should not give up on Gaza. And because the genocide is still going on, every day we have dozens of Palestinians who are killed, starved to death. I know that people have other interests. They might, over time, especially if it takes long time, they will lose some interest in Gaza. But remember that people in Gaza did not lose interest. And the fight in Gaza is not just a fight for Gaza. As I said, it's a global fight. It will impact you at some point. Mm-hmm. It will impact other people. So it's not limited to Gaza. So please do not give up on Gaza. People are sharing their stories. Do the least. Share their stories. boycott companies that are complicit in the genocide. This is the least we could do, and it's not taking much. We're still privileged. When we boycott, we have other options to eat, but people in Gaza do not have these privileges and these options. There are people in Gaza who are eating animal feed now, and some people think this is actually a privilege because other people do not have it in Gaza.
Yeah, powerful stuff, Yousef. But the question that Kyrie posed still has been slightly unanswered, Yousef, because we all understand what you're pushing for. But it is a reality that fatigue will set in. I'm just wondering what kind of strategies or tactics are you thinking about to make sure your writings come out in the right places, or what else can you do and people of your profession do to make sure the story stays alive for as long as possible?
I think telling personal stories of people is very impactful because people relate to personal stories. And I've seen this before in my speeches and webinars. People do relate to personal stories. So if you tell someone, a student, say in the US, who suffers from death, about students in Gaza, they will relate to their experience. And therefore, I have been very much invested in telling personal stories of people.
Right.
Doctors, engineers, teachers, young people, students. Because again, people will relate to these stories. And for this reason, I have worked on, among other projects, along with other colleagues, on creating a book titled This Place in Gaza that was actually published just this Monday and launched at the Selangor Book Fair, titled This Place in Gaza.
Okay.
It has the stories of 27 Palestinians who were displaced during the genocide. Men and women, old, young, students, teachers, educators, doctors, just sharing their personal stories.
Sure.
I will always believe in the power of personal stories to change hearts and minds. Even when people look away, when they lose interest, a personal story of ordinary people on the ground will bring them back.
I think that's really powerful because I like that, Yousef, because if you tell the story of a student in Gaza, that will resonate with a student here thinking about, what that student has to go through. Cancer patient, for instance, somebody going to chemotherapy here, it's easy. You can just go to the hospital, no problem. But like, as you said, they get to get permits to go to the hospital, whether it's in Israel or somewhere else, denied that opportunity. I think you should continue to amplify as many of these stories as possible.
And it's our responsibility to amplify them as well.
Yeah. Maybe even find a podcaster in Gaza so that their story will speak to Cheryl and myself in how they are struggling to send the message out. Before we go to the break, Yousef, maybe share with us a little bit about these voices that you are trying to amplify, that you are bringing all these personal stories. These stories, are they stories of despair or are they stories of hope? What are you trying to
It's a mix. Here? I think expecting people to be resilient always is unrealistic, especially that they have lost everything, and especially that it's been going on for more than a year now. So there are people who did not lose hope. There are people who lost hope, especially that the international community failed to stop the genocide. And the Palestinians in Gaza, or those among them who feel despair, are right. Totally right. But also there are stories of hope, of people fearing starving Palestinians under unbelievable, conditions and circumstances. People who try to do their best to serve their community. Doctors helping other people for free. give us hope. Educators who continue now during the genocide to teach children, because we have one of the highest literacy rates in the world.
Sure.
More than 97% of people in Gaza can read and write, and there are thousands of students with postgraduate degrees. So education is very important for us. And there was an ecocide by Israel, destruction of knowledge in the schools and universities. All of Gaza's universities were destroyed. So under these circumstances, you still have people who teach, who give. These stories give us hope. But again, people have all right not to be resilient. Some people chose to just, take a break after they lost everything. Some people lost their minds. That's a human nature.
Sure.
But I think it's our responsibility to stop the genocide so that more people become more hopeful.
Thanks, Yousef. We'll take a quick break and come back after this.
Welcome back to Kindred Stories. Yousef, we've talked a lot about the power of storytelling, of narratives. I wanted to bring it back to today and the coming weeks and months, and your hope as an ordinary Palestinian resisting in your own way. Where do you see the genocide happen? Where do you see the genocide today? And in the sense of, what are your hopes and expectations for when it might end?
I hope that it ends today, absolutely, immediately, effectively, now. Because every single minute, every single second means more destruction, more loss of life on the Palestinian side. And there are reasons why I feel hopeful that it will end and that justice will be served. Although there is a huge destruction in Gaza, we've never seen something like that, even during the Nakba of 1948, when Israel was created and Palestinians were displaced. And the reason I feel hopeful is that there is a case now in The Hague against Israel. There are arrest warrants against Netanyahu and his former defense minister, Yoav Gallant. And there are more people. Gaza managed to change the hearts and minds of more people. And I think this is important. I think passing all these ethnic lines, reaching out to people who didn't know or who were told a different story, different narrative is important. So there is a shift in the narrative, and this makes me hopeful, although the price was so heavy. And looking at other experiences, South Africa, Ireland, Algeria, people will eventually get their rights. Committing massacres will not stop people from getting their independence and self-determination. And I think Israel should learn from history. Will they? That's a different question. But as a Palestinian, I have absolute belief, 100% believe that we will get our freedom eventually, sooner or later.
Yousef, I want to bring some dose of reality on your hope. First, Israel does not believe in a two-state solution. Let's be real. After Oslo, where they agreed to this two-state solution, they've done everything but honor that. You know this. You know the settlements that they're building in the West Bank. You know the siege of Gaza. This is not a two-state solution. They just talk about the two-state solution. For as long as there is a state of Israel, I do not believe that they want to see a free and independent Palestine. One. Secondly, sorry to say, we've said this many times on this podcast, Malaysia, I'm proud because we are one of the countries who walk the talk when it comes to Palestine. But many other Muslim countries don't. They are captured by their own interests. They are thinking about their geopolitical interests, especially those countries who are close to Palestine geographically. And because of that, because of the fact that the House of Islam is divided. That also prevents your dream of a free and independent Palestinian state from becoming a reality. You do work at the AFSC, American Friends Service Committee, but groups like the AFSC, in resource-wise, you can't compete with the likes of AIPAC, who own many senators, many congressmen, even presidential candidates. So I've given you 3 reasons why your hope is difficult. We want so badly, Cheryl and myself, for your dream to happen. But these are just 3 examples of why it may not happen.
So Israel believes in no state solution. They want to maintain the status quo. The status quo is apartheid, segregation, genocide. They will never give Palestinians a state, not even in Gaza. And therefore, they will never implement 2-state solution. And they will never implement 1-state solution. I think when we talk about these solutions, we should focus on equal rights to Palestinians rather than states. Because even if we get 2 states, which is a dream now, as long as we do not get equal rights, it doesn't mean anything.
Sure.
Yes, the AFSC is doing its best to raise awareness. There are many difficulties, challenges. The Israeli lobby is very powerful in the United States. But also, if you look at the past 10 years, there's a pattern of change. Like from 10 members of Congress, sometimes you reach 30 to 35, and sometimes 90 when it comes to Palestine, people supporting Palestine. Like there is the UNRWA Funding Restoration Act. I think it was signed by about 90 members of Congress. There was a motion in the Senate to block aid and weapons to Israel that was supported by, I believe, 18 members of the Senate. And this is huge. This is the first time in history you would find this number of senators supporting blocking aid and weapons to Israel.
So you think the political ground is shifting in the US?
It's shifting. It's slowly shifting. Do we have the majority? No, not in the Senate, not in the Congress. But if you compare it with 10 years ago, there's a change. And again, we have to differentiate between peoples and governments everywhere in the world.
Yes.
And the reason I'm hopeful is that I know people are on the right side of history. People will never support genocide. And this will result in change in the next elections. Now, if you look at the US, Biden has lost because he supported genocide in Gaza, partially.
Yes.
But doesn't mean that Trump is an angel. He might be worse. But the people who now ask questions, why do we have to choose between these 2 people?
Yeah.
So this is creating more conversations, and on the long run, this will be in favor of Palestine.
Yousef, your hope and faith inspires us. Kyrie's given the version where it's perhaps less optimistic. Let me balance it out by asking you about your hope for solidarity with the Jewish people. And I've always been one of those folks that really hope that this solution comes in part through internal reforms from within the Israeli society. Obviously, I'm saying this from a million miles away, and I have no context the way you do on the ground. And I understand for some people that seems completely, ambitious to the point of delusion. But I feel that the solution must come in part from that. So I wanted to ask you, is that something you see slowly happening? Is the Israeli left, for example, you've got this MP, Ofer Kassif, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who seems to be supporting the South African case, and he's Jewish, as I understand it. You see, Jewish Americans who are at least on the streets. There is a sizable number that appear to have solidarity with Palestine. Am I grasping at straws, or is there a shift even within that society?
I think there is a change, but this change is not enough. It's still very minimal on the margins of the Israeli society. There are people who are not happy with Netanyahu because of his judicial reforms. He's trying to take over
But there's nothing to do with
the judiciary. Yeah. And many of these Israelis who protest Netanyahu because of his judicial reforms protest on what used to be Palestinian towns and villages. But they never recognize the history, the ruins of these villages, that Israel was built on the ruins of the Palestinian people. I'm more hopeful in the change that is taking place among Jewish Americans. That is going to push some change in Israel itself. And I'm also very hopeful because of the global change in general, in Europe, in the US, even here in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, in favor of Palestine. So there is a change, and I see this change taking place more among the Jewish American community. There was a documentary about the life of Refaat Alareer in Japanese, and it also features Elise Cohen, a Jewish American who hosted me and Refaat in 2014, speaking about the legacy of Refaat. So I know it firsthand. In Israel, I think maybe this genocide will stir a conversation in Israel itself. Moshe Ya'alon, a former Israeli minister who is when you are a defense minister, you do a lot of ugly things. He said war crimes were committed in Gaza just 2 days ago. And he repeated that again. Maybe he himself was involved in war crimes. So there are statements coming out of Israel.
Slowly. What do you make of this Haaretz, the left-wing newspaper, also appearing to change its tone a bit?
Yeah, so there's increasing articles that are critical of the Israeli government by Haaretz, but we have also to understand that the Hebrew version of Haaretz is different than the English version.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Double speak.
And Haaretz means the land. Right. So this is a term used by Israelis who believe that the land of Israel extends from the river to the sea. But again, there is a change in Israel, but it's not enough.
Yousef, thank you so much for spending time with us on Kindred Stories. We will continue in our own small way to contribute, to amplify the voices, to be with you in solidarity, the resistance. May your dream of a free and independent home of Palestine, inshallah, sooner than later, become a reality. Please continue to write. Please continue to bring the stories and the voices of your people so that the rest of the world continue to rise with you in resistance against this occupying power.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.